Brexit has very, very quickly come to the Tories to be almost this intoxicating drug for them, to a point where they cannot literally let it go. This is why we are involved in so much culture war nonsense. And I've said before, I do not even bother wanting to touch it. I don't bother, doing any videos about it on my channel, apart from the very, very rare occasions where even I find their nonsense so egregious I have to respond to it, especially if it's to do with history, because I'm a big history fan. And like the stuff with like the National Trust and English heritage recently have been essentially complaining about the fact that historians are essentially doing their job. And we even had a piece we covered on a live stream just recently where we're going over GB News. And literally the guy was saying, yeah, I've got no problem with this. I've got absolutely no problem. I just don't want it shoved down my throat. And I'm like, what do you think's going on at these places? They're not doing that. They're just creating like new exhibits and like new pieces of information. They're not literally jumping out of bushes, at people walking around the gardens, shouting at them about slavery. That's what they seem to think's going on, but that's not happening. But yeah, this new culture war nonsense that the Tories are on is a direct result of Brexit, because they do not want to talk about Brexit, they do not want to talk about the economy, and they do not want to talk about recovery from our current situation, because I've said a lot of times before, the next couple of years are going to be very, very bad for a whole lot of people, because we are going to be facing a lot of economic consequences, not only from Brexit, but from COVID and also austerity as well. Literally, we've got the classic ABCs, and they are all going to hit us straight at one. So, before we jump into today's article, please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. It does help out the channel a lot. And also down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, buy me a coffee. And also the YouTube memberships are open as well. So, on with today's article. Like I say, this comes from The Guardian. And the title is, "The British politics is still drunk on the Brexit spirit, and Boris Johnson won't call time." There is a simple reason why Boris Johnson and European leaders failed to find common ground over Brexit at last week's G7 summit. They are not even talking about the same thing. For the Prime Minister, Brexit is a matter of national character that cannot be described in legal documents. For the continental politicians, the legal texts contain the true meaning of a project that only exists in the real world as a set of rules to be implemented. To Johnson, the withdrawal agreement was a single-use tool for levering him out of a tight spot. For Brussels, it is the chamber into which Britain has levered itself. That difference will, of course, continue to become a source of friction, not because it is not a misunderstanding, but Johnson knows that legal arguments over Northern Ireland Protocol favour the European position. He chooses not to care, and to concede on the principle that any part of the UK is subject to European regulatory standards, the compromise that he himself signed to avoid a land border on the island of Ireland would be to admit that a portion of sovereignty was conceded in the negotiations. And that, of course, would be a stain on his self-image as the man who made a clean break from Brussels. He finds more confrontation far more appealing, not least because he expects it to achieve more than actual compliance. Whether it's true demands on how you actually define achievement. And of course, Johnson's calculation doesn't prioritise the peace in Northern Ireland. If it did, he would spend time telling the unionist community that customs checks at the Irish seaports were an administrative fact of life after Brexit, not a precursor to severance from the UK. He would have to have applied some effort in rebuffing the most paranoid sectarian interpretations of the protocol. Instead, he has gamed and inflamed the grievance in belief that the threat of that conflagration puts pressure on the EU to actually make concessions. If Northern Ireland is on fire, any insistence from Brussels on maximum implementations on rules of sausage imports will look callous and disproportionate, and the Prime Minister expects to avoid meeting his treaty obligations in much the same way that an arsonist expects to avoid paying the insurance premiums on a house that he is currently torching. This technique will not do much for Britain's reputation abroad, but Johnson's mind rarely strays far from his domestic audience, to whom he will have to explain that everything is the EU's fault. His party and most of the media will endorse that interpretation, as it has always done, and Labour will shuffle uncomfortably on the opposition benches. It is now wearingly familiar of the conundrum for Keir Starmer: how to prove that Johnson is the author of European strife without sounding like Brussels' barrister, appealing against a verdict that has already been handed down by the court of public opinion. When Johnson's critics say he must be held accountable for Brexit, they use that word to mean the process and cost of severing ties with Britain's neighbours and losing their frictionless access to their markets. That is the Remainer definition, even when used by people who accept that there is no Remain cause left to fight. When Tories say Brexit, they mean it in a wider sense of a cultural revolution sustained by belief and national pride. All revolutions demand constant vigilance against disloyalty, and the project's goals are far too abstract to be attainable in any economic useful sense. There are no new jobs in the sovereignty manufacturing sector, so the momentum is maintained by always reimagining and again refighting the old enemy. Starmer has no intention of disintegrating EU, of disinheriting the EU membership. He also knows that Labour's route to a Commons majority passes through many Leave voting constituencies. But for that same reason, Johnson needs Labour to represent a suite of social attitudes that indicate the present Remainersness of the heart. In Downing Street's strategic conception of the electorate, the Prime Minister represents the mainstream of common sense, red-blooded patriots, for while the Labour leader stands for nitpicking, naysaying, woke scolds and herbivores. The cleavage is artificial, but it still is very resonant. Even when Starmer is closer than the Tories to a majority opinion, he always has been on the need for timely lockdowns and cautious reopenings during the pandemic. He gets absolutely no credit because he is typecast as the guy who tuts on the sidelines. He sounds very Remainly, even though he never talks about Europe. This tale is a tale of Brexitum, a political mode that has its genesis in the referendum, but has evolved into something far much more wider. It is defining its future and its fight from complexity and reality to symbols and fantasy, and that is the habit that has developed its devotees to cultivate themselves to win the 2016 and 2019 liberation struggle. Theresa May was broken by the attempt to divert from the frothing stream of Leaver demands to narrow down channels of responsible statecraft. Her successor has declared that restraint unnecessarily, and then appeared to prove the point by getting Brexit done. The trick was to sign the treaty without intending to honour it. All who serve in the cabinet have signed up to the Johnson Code of Conduct, and the evidence and truth of subordinate to the performance of boasterism. Sometimes facts fight through. Science has prevailed in the formulation of COVID policy, but not always by the most direct route. In other areas, Brexitism sets the complete tone. There are ambitions for levelling up and building back better, but they are rhetorical zeppelins, floating on the political horizon, carrying no cargo of policy. Real-world government is a semblance of arguments over what is available on current budgets and, if more cash is needed, who will pay. Any serious plan for green energy or reducing the NHS waiting lists or reforming social care begins by telling the public about the tough choices and the present sacrifice for future gain. Johnson has been forced to deliver unacceptable messages in many live coronavirus press conferences over the past year, and has visibly hated every single second of it. The po-faced seriousness was supposed to lie abandoned on the far shore of the Rubicon, where he crossed to reach Brexit. And the journey still continues, because Brexit is really not a destination, but a state of mind. It is not something that the government can do, but be a way of deferring all things government should be doing about what would rather not, but it would rather not contemplate at the moment. It is the drink that British politics takes in the morning to postpone the hangover for yet another day. And Johnson is the national bartender. He keeps the tab open and the punters in good cheer. And the ever-sober Starmer ponders his joyless temperament and drum outside. So I completely 100% agree on this. This is a really difficult situation, and I'm not going to lie. But I genuinely think the way out of this, what Starmer has to do, is he just has to tackle Johnson head on with facts. And even if you are, again, get portrayed as the sober-loving truth teller, sooner or later, all these lies that the Tories are telling about Brexit and the difficulties that they are choosing not to take, Starmer, eventually people will start to say, to sober up to the reality of what's going on and say, well, actually, hang on, Starmer's got a point. Johnson's talking about nothing. I mean, we see this all the time in Prime Minister's question times. Boris Johnson, whenever he takes a question on Brexit, talks about the wonderful opportunities and the how wonderful Brexit is and all this nonsense, but there's no physical substance to it. And I think the more Labour takes the tact to tell the truth, you know, the fantastic quote from, Abraham Lincoln, you know, the more you tell people the truth, you know, the more they want to hang you. So it's best to make them laugh so that they don't. That's the unfortunate situation that we are in. It is far better to tell the people the political realities that Britain is now in and what it faces ahead of the lies. Because sooner or later, we've used this metaphor before, but, you know, Brexit was the hot air that raised the Conservative balloon to where they are now. And they have to keep on supplying that hot air. But sooner or later, there will be not enough hot air to sustain that hot air balloon. And sooner or later, Johnson and the rest of the Conservative Party will come crashing down to the ground. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, well, buy me a coffee. And as always, we'll see you all next time.